The man in seat 14A had exactly 47 minutes to live. He didn't know it. He was reading an Italian newspaper, sipping espresso from a paper cup, watching the Lombardy countryside blur past his window. 3 rows behind him sat a woman knitting a blue scarf. Across the aisle, an elderly gentleman dozed with a crossword puzzle on his lap. Normal passengers on a normal Tuesday morning, except none of them were who they claimed to be. And somewhere beneath the floor of carriage 7, a device no larger than a cigarette lighter had already begun releasing something invisible into the recycled air. This is the story of how Israeli intelligence executed the most sophisticated assassination in modern history. No guns, no explosions, no evidence. Just a man who boarded a train alive and arrived at his destination dead, while cameras recorded everything and investigators found nothing. But here's what makes this story different from every assassination you've heard before. What happened in the final moments would haunt everyone who witnessed it, and the last words spoken would echo through the corridors of intelligence agencies for years to come. This is Operation Silent Passage. His name was Faisal al-Rashid. But in the shadow world of Middle Eastern intelligence, names are currency that changes value with every border crossing. To his family in Gaza, he was simply Uncle Faisal, the quiet engineer who sent money home every month and visited twice a year with gifts for the children. He never talked about his work. He never explained where the money came from. He simply arrived with toys for the little ones and envelopes of cash for the adults, and no one asked questions they didn't want answered. To Hamas leadership, he was Abu Samir, the financial architect who designed funding networks so sophisticated that Western intelligence agencies spent years trying to understand them. He was the invisible hand that kept the resistance alive. To Mossad analysts in Tel Aviv, he was Target Crimson, Priority Level 1, Authorization for Elimination signed by the Prime Minister himself. His photograph hung on a wall reserved for the most dangerous men in the world. Faisal was born in 1957 in the Jabalia refugee camp, a sprawling maze of concrete and corrugated metal where 100,000 Palestinians lived in conditions the United Nations called unfit for human habitation. The streets were unpaved. Children played in rubble that had been rubble since their grandparents arrived. His father had been a schoolteacher in Jaffa before 1948, a man who believed education was the only weapon that couldn't be confiscated at checkpoints. "They can take your home," his father would say. "They can take your land, but they cannot take what you know. Knowledge crosses every border." That belief shaped young Faisal. While other boys threw stones at Israeli patrols, he sat in his family's one-room dwelling, teaching himself mathematics by candlelight. He learned to calculate compound interest before he learned to ride a bicycle. He memorized currency exchange rates the way other children memorized football scores. His teachers noticed something unusual about him, not just intelligence, but patience, a willingness to wait, to plan, to think 3 moves ahead. By 16, he had won a scholarship to study economics at Cairo University, one of only 3 students from Jabalia selected that year. His mother wept when he boarded the bus to Egypt, pressing a small Quran into his hands and making him promise to return. "Come back to us," she whispered. "Whatever you become out there, don't forget where you come from." He kept half that promise. He returned, but not as the son she remembered. Cairo in the 1970s was a furnace of ideologies. Students debated socialism, nationalism, and revolution in crowded cafes that smelled of tobacco and strong coffee. Faisal arrived as a studious boy interested in numbers. He graduated as something else entirely. A man who understood that money moved mountains more effectively than bombs, that financial networks could sustain resistance movements for decades, while armed struggle exhausted itself in months. He had learned a truth that would define his life. Bullets run out, but money flows forever. But here's what the official files never captured. What truly transformed Faisal wasn't ideology. It was a photograph. During his second year at university, news reached Cairo that Israeli forces had demolished his family's home in Jabalia. A security measure, the military called it. His father was teaching a night class when soldiers arrived. His mother was given 15 minutes to collect belongings before bulldozers reduced 40 years of memories to rubble. 40 years of photographs, of children's drawings, of his father's books, gone in 15 minutes. Faisal received a photograph from his sister 3 days later. It showed his father standing in the ruins, holding a single book he had managed to save. a water-damaged copy of Palestinian poetry, pages fluttering in the wind. His father's face showed no anger, no tears, just a quiet devastation that was somehow worse than screaming. That image burned itself into Faisal's memory like a brand. He never spoke of it, never displayed emotion when colleagues discussed the occupation. But those who knew him well noticed that after receiving that photograph, something behind his eyes had turned to ice. The warm, curious student had become something harder, something colder, something patient in a way that frightened people who recognized what patience could become. For the next 3 decades, he built the financial infrastructure that would make Hamas one of the most well-funded resistance movements in history. His methods were elegant, almost beautiful in their complexity. Charities that built real schools while funding weapons procurement. Import-export companies moving legitimate goods alongside encrypted communications. Shell, corporations in Cyprus and Malta that existed only on paper. Cryptocurrency networks before most intelligence agencies understood what cryptocurrency was. He never touched a weapon. He never planned an attack. But every rocket that flew, every tunnel that was dug, Faisal's fingerprints were on the money that made it possible. By 2019, Israeli intelligence estimated his networks moved $300 million annually. Mossad calculated eliminating Faisal would equal destroying an entire weapons factory. But there was one problem: finding him. Faisal survived 40 years in a business where life expectancy was measured in months. He never used the same phone twice, never slept in the same location 3 nights running, traveled under 17 different identities, each with perfect documentation. No vices, no gambling that could be tracked, no mistresses who could be turned, no luxury addiction that would make him predictable. He lived simply. He moved constantly. He trusted almost no one. For 15 years, Mossad tried to locate him. They came close twice: Istanbul 2007, Kuala Lumpur 2014, but Faisal always vanished before they could act. It was as if he could smell them coming. Faisal possessed an almost supernatural ability to sense danger. Colleagues who survived later testified that he would sometimes stand up in the middle of meetings, announce, "We need to leave now," and walk out without explanation. No reason given, no warning signs visible, just that sudden certainty that it was time to go. Those who followed him lived, those who hesitated often didn't. But in the winter of 2023, Faisal made a mistake. A small one. Human. The kind of error that destroys men who have been careful for too long. After 40 years of perfect discipline, he allowed himself to feel something. His mother was dying. She was 89 years old, her body failing after a lifetime of hardship. The same woman who had pressed a Quran into his hands at the bus station in 1973. The same woman who had watched bulldozers destroy her home. Doctors in Gaza gave her weeks, perhaps days, and Faisal, the man who had disciplined himself never to let emotion compromise security, decided he needed to see her one final time. He needed to hold her hand. He needed to say goodbye. The journey required crossing through Europe, the only route available to a man whose face was flagged in every Middle Eastern airport database. Turkey to Italy, then through complex connections to Egypt, where associates would smuggle him into Gaza through the tunnel networks. A journey of thousands of miles to reach a bedside a few hundred kilometers away. This time someone was watching, and this time they were ready. In a basement office beneath a nondescript building in Tel Aviv, a woman named Yael Mizrahi stared at a surveillance photograph until her eyes ached. The room was cold, lit by the blue glow of monitors. Coffee cups accumulated on her desk like monuments to sleepless nights. The image was grainy, captured by a security camera at Istanbul's Ataturk airport. It showed a man in his late 60s, gray-bearded, wearing a simple brown jacket, walking past a newsstand. His face was partially obscured by a hat. But the gait was unmistakable. That slight favoring of the left leg, a remnant of a car accident in Beirut 20 years earlier. "It's him," Yael said quietly. The words carried the weight of 11 years of hunting. The man beside her, Deputy Director Amos Brenner, leaned closer to the screen. Brenner was 62, a veteran of operations that would never appear in any history book. His left hand was missing 2 fingers. souvenirs from an extraction in Damascus that had gone wrong in 1995. You're certain? I've studied this man for 11 years, Amos. I know how he walks, how he holds his shoulders, how he turns his head when checking for surveillance. That's Faisal al-Rashid, and he's traveling without security. His bodyguards couldn't get seats on his flight. Where is he going? Italy, then Egypt. His mother is dying in Gaza. We think he's trying to reach her. Sentimental, Brenner murmured. After all these years, after all that discipline, sentiment. He shook his head. The human heart. It betrays us all eventually. Brenner walked to the window. A train, he finally said. Moving target. Hundreds of witnesses. Security cameras at every station. And we need to make it look natural. Yes. You have a plan? Yael opened a folder on the desk. Inside were technical specifications and a photograph of a device that looked like a small metal cylinder. I have more than a plan. I have a ghost. The device was called Whisper. Officially, it did not exist. It appeared in no inventory. No budget line mentioned it. It delivered a synthetic compound mimicking natural cardiac arrest, but only after 30 to 45 minutes, allowing operatives to escape before death occurred. The delay was the genius of the design. The killer could be miles away before the victim's heart stopped. The compound left no trace that any standard autopsy would find. It metabolized into naturally occurring substances. Only laboratories knowing the exact marker would find evidence, and no laboratory outside Israel knew it existed. But Whisper had one limitation. It worked only in enclosed spaces with recycled air. A train carriage was perfect. 6 operatives would board at different stations. One would carry Whisper concealed as an asthma inhaler, completely unremarkable. At a predetermined point, she would activate the device. The compound would release into the air circulation. Dosage was calibrated to be lethal only for someone of Faisal's weight and age. Approximately 35 minutes after exposure, he would experience classic cardiac symptoms. His heart would stop. Death certificate would read, natural causes. Operations Committee approved the plan. Tuesday evening. Operation Silent Passage. Milan Central Station, 7:23 a.m. Morning fog clung to the city like a gray blanket. Commuters moved beneath century-old ceilings. Espresso drifted from platform cafes. Pigeons strutted between columns that had watched travelers come and go since 1931. Faisal entered through the west entrance, carrying a leather bag worn soft by years of travel. He had aged since Istanbul. The journey required 3 identity changes and a 14-hour layover in Vienna. But he was close now. Rome by noon. Cairo tomorrow. Then, God willing, his mother's bedside before she drew her last breath. He purchased his ticket with cash. Window seat, carriage 7. First class, more expensive but quieter. He didn't notice the woman at the adjacent kiosk purchasing a ticket for the same carriage 3 seconds later. Or the man with a newspaper pressing a button on his phone as he passed. Or the elderly couple exchanging a glance that communicated volumes. The trap was already set. The train waited at platform 12, a sleek Frecciarossa painted arterial red. Faisal boarded at 7:41, found his seat, and settled with his newspaper. He thought of his mother's face when he left for Cairo all those years ago, proud and terrified and heartbroken. He wondered if she would recognize him now. The train began moving at 8 a.m. 3 rows behind Faisal, a woman with graying hair took out knitting needles and began working on a blue scarf. The needles clicked softly, rhythmically. Her real name was Dalia Ashkenazi, 58 years old, 31 years with Mossad, 11 confirmed eliminations, never identified, never connected to any death. She was a ghost who knitted blue scarves while she waited for people to die. The yarn concealed a device monitoring air quality. When the compound reached optimal concentration, it would vibrate against her palm. In seat 7C, a man worked on a crossword. Ezra Levine, his German passport said. Observation and contingency. Near the front, a young couple whispered in Italian, neither young nor romantic. Former IDF Special Operations. Their job, block the aisle if Faisal moved carriages. And in seat 12A, directly across from Faisal, sat an auburn-haired woman with what appeared to be an inhaler in her purse. It was not an inhaler. At 8:17, she excused herself for the restroom. As she passed Faisal, she glanced at him for 0.4 seconds, confirming identity. He didn't look up. In the restroom, she removed the device. Warm, humming with potential. Years of development, millions of dollars of research, all compressed into a cylinder smaller than her finger. She pressed the activation sequence. A soft click. A faint hiss. Nothing. She returned at 8:21. No one noticed anything unusual. In approximately 47 minutes, Faisal al-Rashid would be dead. Faisal put down his newspaper and began to pray. 8:34 a.m. Past Bologna, racing through the Apennines at 300 kilometers per hour. Ancient hill towns flashed past. Faisal finished praying and opened his eyes. Something was wrong. The carriage looked normal. Passengers read, dozed, stared at phones. And yet, after 40 years of sensing danger before it materialized, Faisal had instincts operating below conscious thought. Right now, every instinct screamed. He looked around the carriage, slowly, carefully. The elderly man with the crossword, the knitting woman with the blue scarf, the romantic couple near the front, the auburn-haired woman reading. Nothing unusual, nothing out of place. But Faisal had not survived this long by ignoring his instincts. He stood up, casual, unhurried. He retrieved his bag and walked toward the rear of the carriage. Dahlia continued knitting without looking up, but her peripheral vision tracked every step. Ezra turned a page. The couple stopped whispering. Faisal reached the carriage door. His hand touched the handle, and then he turned around. For a long moment, he stood at the rear of the carriage and looked at each passenger in turn. His eyes moved from face to face with systematic attention. When his gaze reached Dahlia, he paused. Their eyes met. And Dahlia saw something she had never seen in any target before. Not fear, not anger, not desperate calculation. Recognition. He knew. He didn't know how. He didn't know who. But he knew that death was in this carriage, breathing the same recycled air, waiting for his heart to stop. Faisal smiled. A small, tired smile, the expression of a man who had always known this moment would come. Then he walked back to his seat, sat down, and picked up his newspaper. The next 18 minutes were the longest of Dahlia's life. She continued knitting, hands steady despite adrenaline. Faisal read his newspaper, occasionally glanced outside, checked his phone once. He made no attempt to flee, no attempt to alert anyone. He simply sat and read and waited. At 8:51, her yarn vibrated. Optimal concentration. 9:01. Faisal closed his eyes, breathing labored. 9:04. His hand moved to his chest. 9:06. He looked directly at Dahlia. What happened next would replay in her memory for the rest of her life. Faisal stood, slowly, deliberately. His face was pale, perspiration visible. He was experiencing early cardiac distress, exactly as designed. He should have been calling for help. Instead, he walked toward Dahlia's seat. The couple tensed. Ezra's hand moved toward his concealed weapon, but Faisal wasn't attacking. He was approaching with the measured dignity of a man keeping an appointment he had long expected. He stopped beside her seat. For a moment, he simply looked down at her, at this woman who had come to kill him on a train, who had sat 3 rows behind him knitting a blue scarf while poison filled his lungs. Then he spoke. His voice was quiet, strained, but perfectly clear. "I know what you are," he said in Hebrew. "I've always known this day would come." Dahlia's hands stopped moving. The blue yarn fell still. "I want you to give a message to those who sent you," Faisal continued. "Tell them I understand. Tell them I forgive. Them. We are all soldiers in a war that began before we were born and will continue after we are gone. None of us chose our side. None of us will see the end." He paused, pressing his hand against his chest. But tell them they have not won anything today. There are 100 more like me. 1,000. You can kill us one by one, and still you will not have peace. Because peace cannot be assassinated. It can only be built, and building requires hands that are not covered in blood. Faisal reached into his pocket and removed his phone. He held it up so she could see the screen. A photograph of an elderly woman in a hospital bed, eyes closed, medical equipment surrounding her. My mother, Faisal said. She died 3 hours ago. I received the message just after we left Milan. I was always going home to bury her. That is all I wanted, to say goodbye to my mother. His legs buckled. He caught himself on the seat back. I have lived a life I believed was necessary, he whispered. History will judge whether I was right, but I want you to know, I am not afraid. I have been afraid of death my whole life, and now that it is here, I feel only... He searched for the word. Relief. Faisal al-Rashid collapsed in the aisle of carriage 7. The couple rushed forward, calling for help. Other passengers stood, alarmed. Someone pulled the emergency cord. None of it mattered. By Florence, Faisal was dead. Official cause, acute myocardial infarction. Natural causes. No one questioned it. Dalia left at Florence, drove to Rome, flew to Vienna, then Tel Aviv. She never told anyone what Faisal said. Not her supervisors, not the psychologist. Some things could not be put in reports. Some things had to be carried alone. Operation Silent Passage was classified as a success. Target eliminated. No operatives compromised. In Gaza, Hamas announced a senior leader had died of natural causes. A funeral was held for an empty coffin. In Tel Aviv, a file was closed. And somewhere in Haifa, Dalia Ashkenazi sat by her window, watching the Mediterranean catch the evening light. She was 60 now, 33 years of service. She had done necessary things, difficult things. She had never questioned her work. Not truly, but Faisal's words would not leave her. Peace cannot be assassinated. It can only be built. She thought about his mother dying alone while her son crossed Europe. She thought about her own mother, who passed 5 years earlier while Dalia was on assignment. She thought about the wars defining her life, and wondered whether any of it made the world safer, or whether they were all actors in a tragedy rewriting itself generation after generation. She did not have answers, only questions that grew heavier with each passing year. Questions about duty and conscience, questions about enemies and humanity. Questions about whether the walls we build between ourselves are as permanent as we pretend. The sun set over Haifa, painting the water orange and gold and red, like fire, like blood, like something beautiful built on something terrible. City lights emerged one by one, like stars falling to earth. Somewhere in the city, families were sitting down to dinner. Children were doing homework. Lovers were meeting for evening walks along the promenade. Normal life continuing as it always did, as it always would, regardless of the invisible wars being fought in its shadow. And Dalia sat in darkness, thinking about a man she had killed, the words he had spoken before death, and the forgiveness she could not accept. She would carry those words for the rest of her life. She knew that now. They would be there when she woke in the morning. They would be there when she tried to sleep at night. They would be there in every moment of silence, every moment of reflection, every moment when she allowed herself to wonder whether she had spent her life building something or destroying something. Peace cannot be assassinated. It can only be built. Perhaps that was his final victory. Not survival. He had always known survival was impossible, but planting a seed of doubt in the mind of his enemy, making her question what she had never questioned before, making her wonder, for the first time in 33 years, whether there might be another way. The train from Milan to Rome still runs daily. 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year, carrying thousands of passengers who will never know the history of the carriage they occupy. Businessmen typing on laptops. Tourists photographing the countryside through smudged windows. Students reading textbooks. Elderly couples holding hands, grateful for another day together. Passengers bored in the morning mist settle into leather seats, watch Italy blur past in a ribbon of green and gold and terracotta. They drink espresso from paper cups. They read newspapers in Italian and German and English. They doze against windows and dream of wherever they're going. None of them know that Carriage 7 was once an execution chamber. None of them sense the invisible residue of what happened there on a Tuesday morning that the world has already forgotten. But sometimes, not often, but sometimes, an elderly passenger will feel a strange presence beside them. A chill that has nothing to do with the air conditioning. A whisper at the edge of hearing, just below the rumble of wheels on tracks. And if they are very still, if they hold their breath and listen very carefully, they might hear something that sounds almost like words, almost like a voice from somewhere far away, speaking across an impossible distance. Tell them I understand. Tell them I forgive them. The train continues south, through tunnels carved through ancient mountains, over bridges spanning rivers that have flowed since before memory, past villages where church bells mark the hours as they have for centuries. Something that might be grief, might be memory, continues its endless journey. Some trains never stop running. Some messages never stop being delivered. And some ghosts never stop asking questions the living are too afraid to answer. What does Faisal al-Rashid's death reveal? That certain people can be eliminated anywhere, anytime. That technology has made assassination an art practiced in plain sight, but perhaps something else as well. That even in darkness, dignity persists. That facing death, some choose forgiveness over hatred. Faisal was a man who financed violence, also a man who wanted to say goodbye to his mother, a target on a list, also a human who offered absolution to his killer. History will judge his life, but the more important question, what would we have done in his place, and what would we have done in hers? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If this story made you think about invisible wars shaping our world, share it. Subscribe for more investigations into operations governments deny and humanity that persists despite them, because the next story is already waiting to be told.